We're adding a special touch with our homemade sauce. Hey guys, welcome back to At the Table. Sydney here, and today we are going to be making another dish that you could use your leftover chicken if that's what you have, or you could go a different route, which we will be talking about in just a little bit. We are going to focus this time on making your own seasonings and sauces. So if you are, again, trying to save a little bit of money since things have gotten a little bit more expensive at the store, this is a great way for you to save. And it's a great way for you to use different things, make your own, which actually gives, to me, things a little bit better flavor. So the first thing that we're gonna be making is our own homemade basil pesto. So the dish we're making will be it's like a chicken stir fry with basil pesto, but instead of buying the $6 or $8 jar, teeny tiny jar of basil pesto, we are gonna make our own. And this is a recipe that one of my colleagues, Cassidy Hall, she has made this before. We've done it in our programs together. And it's just such a great way to make your own pesto because it uses things like spinach and cashews in it that are not traditional in your basil pesto, but it's a lot more affordable. So that's what we're gonna start with today. So the first thing that, as I mentioned, we're using spinach. So instead of having to have a ton of basil, which typically if you are making a homemade basil pesto, you need a good amount of basil, like 1.5, 2 cups, maybe even 3 cups of basil. But basil can be expensive, especially as we are getting into an influx of prices. This could also rise. But it's also one that's really easy to make yourself or to grow yourself. So if you are looking for things to possibly grow on your own this summer, this is an easy one. Herbs, keep them in an area that doesn't get a ton of sun outside, and make sure they stay, of course, warm and watered, but keeping them in an area that's not super sunny. Basil's really easy to grow. It's one of my favorite herbs to grow. But if you just don't have a green thumb and you want to buy it, it can be pricey. So spinach is a great way to make that basil stretch a little bit further. So what we're going to do, I'll do my basil first. I'm actually going to use this whole pack. So you still need about a cup of basil, which I'll just use 1 whole pack of basil and call it good, and make it work with our spinach for the rest of it. So for this, just gonna break it from its stem. You want to rinse this before you begin using it. Let it dry really well before you begin using it. That is what we did today. And that will just help it so that it's not really soggy in whatever you're using it for. And it has the best smell, which the smell gives it that flavor too. So that is why I feel making your own is just so much better. And it doesn't take long if you have a food processor or blender that you can put everything into. So I did buy the big package of basil. This is a 1.5 ounce container. They have a smaller package as well. You want to grab the big one if you are making this on your own. And they actually do, once it begins to turn warm, I've seen them sell little bitty basil plants in the grocery store. So just buy one of those that's usually the same amount, if not cheaper, than the buying the package of basil itself. So another way to save a little bit of money. All right, so now we are going to be adding the same amount, well, almost doubling the amount of spinach to the basil. So we have 1.5 cups of spinach, to our 1 cup of basil. So I'm gonna do about that much. And then we're gonna be adding some fresh garlic. Now this is another way for you to save money. Fresh garlic is very affordable, and it's something you just store it outside of your refrigerator, so make sure that it's sitting on the counter. We're gonna use 2 cloves of this, and it's not very expensive, and it just gives whatever dish you're making so much flavor, compared to if you are to buy the jarred minced garlic, which is gonna be more expensive. The fresh, it lasts a good while, and like I said, flavor is there. So to actually take the cloves off from the bulb and get into them, you want to peel the skins. You can use the hard part of your hand, the palm, and just kind of crack it open with that palm. And actually this is 2 cloves together, so we'll just throw that in. We don't even need this second one. So it's pretty easy to crack into that as well, but you do have to give it a little bit of manpower behind it. Just make sure that you don't put your garlic in the refrigerator, because once you do that, it's a little bit more difficult to actually crack it open and get into it. So we'll take a quick break, and then we'll finish making the rest of our basil pesto and then make our dish.
Star Communications strives to provide you with the best video services. That's why we invested in cutting-edge video equipment to bring you new features such as Cloud DVR, Restart TV, local video on demand, advanced parental controls, and higher quality reception. Unfortunately, these improvements require some changes, and existing DVR customers will lose their current recordings. Changes will start the middle of January, so please view all your recorded content. We hope you will love the new Star TV.
All right, so we've got some of the main things that we think about when we think about basil pesto is going to be usually garlic, basil, and olive oil and cheese. Those are usually the primary ingredients. We are adding a little bit different because we did the spinach. And then the other thing that we are going to add, and nuts. So instead of using pine nuts, which is what traditional basil pesto uses, pine nuts can be extremely expensive, and usually you can only find them, at least in our grocery stores like Food Lion, in one of these little bags. This is about a 2-ounce bag, and it can be pricey. Instead of just using all pine nuts, I'm gonna add in some cashews. Now you could do just cashews, no pine nuts, especially if somebody is allergic to tree nuts. These are considered a tree nut, so this would be something they could not have. But cashews, to me, give it a really good creamy flavor. I'm just gonna do half and half because I have them both. But as I said, pine nuts can be pricey. If you feel like this is not within your budget, just do cashews. That will be perfectly fine. So we are doing, oh, that was kind of a bit much. We are doing a little bit of both. That will just help to give it kind of a different flavor here. So I'm gonna do about 1/8 cup of pine nuts, and then 1/8 cup of cashews, or you do a full 1/4 cup of whichever one if you don't want to split them up. And I just bought the lightly salted. You could buy the regular and just avoid salt when you are blending this together. All right, the next thing we have is some Parmesan cheese. So I mentioned that cheese is another big part of our basil pesto. Typically we want to add cheese. Anytime you buy basil pesto in the jar, it's usually got Parmesan or cheese as one of the main ingredients. So that is just about 1/4 cup there. And then the last thing is our olive oil. And we need 2/3 cup of olive oil. And we will blend this guy right on up. So it's a good bit of olive oil, but it is very important in mixing it all together. And you can adjust that, add a little bit more or less depending on how much you need here. All right, So we're gonna just blend her on up. And you can see it's that pretty green color that is gonna be loaded with flavor. When you open it and you just smell it, it just smells so, so good and tastes so, so good too. You don't need a lot of this when you are using it for a recipe. So keep that in mind that it's a little bit goes a long way. So typically you'll use a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons in whatever recipe you're doing. Now, I will say that if you don't feel like you're gonna use this all at once, I like to put it in a mason jar, screw on the lid, and throw it into the freezer. You can also put it in a freezer bag as well. So that way it stays good for a little while, and it's not, you can use it anytime that you want. You might use half of it now, half of it another time. So we're gonna switch over to some of our ingredients, chopping those up. So we've got a couple different vegetables here. I'm gonna grab our cutting board really quick. And these are something that you would find a little bit more seasonally. So we're gonna start with these. You could use different vegetables if you choose. It is whatever is to your liking, but we do have a good amount of veggies here to help give it that good flavor. So I've got zucchini and squash, and you can chop this however you choose. Just try to make them a little bit more uniform pieces so that it all cooks evenly. So I like to just kind of chop them in 3. I chop it in half and then I cut it in 3s. And then I actually just rotate it and cut it all right down the middle. And that way I'm only cutting through it kind of one time. You're not having to cut it a ton. So we'll do the same thing here for my zucchini. So cutting it down in the middle. And then I like to cut it in 2 or 3, depending on how big you want your pieces. And then I just rotate it and cut it the opposite direction. So this recipe, you could serve it really with anything that you like. We're gonna make it today with pasta. A lot of times when we think of pesto, we think of pasta. All right, so we'll get these set to the side, and then we'll see you guys back in just a second to finish up cutting our vegetables.
Just because something may work doesn't mean it's right for your business. Let Star Communications knowledgeable consultants help you customize a hosted voice system that's right for you. Our dedicated experts work with you to understand your business needs and guide you at every step, from choosing and installing services to ongoing maintenance and support. Contact Star today.
Hey guys, welcome back. So we've got our squash and zucchini chopped up. The next thing we're gonna do is cut up our onion here. And I've only got half of an onion, so it's not a ton. But I'm just gonna make those long slits. And then we don't wanna cut all the way through. So remember, we're keeping it to the root. These pieces kind of can come up. They're not falling off though, because it is all attached. And then we cut it in the opposite direction. This is where your nice sharp knife comes in handy. Remove your little exterior. And then I just like to go through it with my knife and chop it a little bit further. And we're gonna throw all of these veggies in at the same time. So I'm just putting them back in my little bowl here, my little strainer, so that we can toss them in all together. And then we also have that bell pepper. Now, this is another one you could switch it up, whatever veggies sound good to you. You don't have to do exactly what we're doing today. I will say most of these are available to you during the summertime, so this is a great one to make as it starts to warm up, simply because we're starting to have access to this stuff. So, and it's a little bit more affordable. So when we're thinking about those local foods and trying to support our local folks, but also trying to save a little bit of money and buy things that are in season, this is a great one to do for that reason. So I'm just getting all my seeds out. I like to chop the top and the bottom off, as you saw, and then I just poke the very top part out of our bell pepper here, just push it through, and it will just come right out and you can separate it. And then we have our little segments, and what I like to do is just cut away from that main seed. And I just discard that. If you got any seeds, I just kind of push them over here to the side because I just don't want any of those. If it gets in your food, it's not a big deal. It'll be fine. And then depending on what you're using it for, if you're doing like a fajitas, you would cut it long ways, but we're gonna chop it a little bit further because y'all know I like it to be chopped all up so we get a little bit in every bite. So this is another recipe that is from budgetbites.com. I mentioned them last episode. And this recipe actually comes to $2.72 per serving. That's if you make it with the chicken. Now, if you're making it with the chicken that you chopped up the whole entire chicken instead of buying pre-cut chicken breast, because remember, as Kelly mentioned, the further that something is processed in terms of what the butcher has to do, so if the butcher has to chop it up into smaller portions, the more expensive it's going to be. So just keep that in mind. If you can learn how to cut things up yourself, cut meats up yourself, that can definitely save you a lot of money. And I like to use that top and that bottom piece because there's no sense in wasting it. Now, if it doesn't fit in terms of the shape that it might be in with whatever your dish you're using it in, you could still chop that up and put it to the side and use it in like soups or stews or something of that nature. Or even salads. You can chop it like we are today and put it into one of those things so that you use it further. A lot of people think that making your own, cooking at home can be expensive, buying vegetables can be expensive. It doesn't have to be. I mean, a lot of it can be planning, but it's also saving things. So let's say you didn't need a whole bell pepper, freeze half of it, and then you can just take it straight from the freezer, throw it into your stir fry. Same as we did with the celery in our previous episode. We just used frozen celery. So if your celery is about to go bad, let's say you bought it for something specific, then definitely go ahead and utilize that. So I'm going to switch gears here, and I'm going to actually switch to our meat. So the meat that I have today, although our recipe calls for chicken, and let's say we used all the chicken that we had when we cut up that whole chicken, I'm using a pork tenderloin. Now this is just to show you guys that you don't have to use exactly what your recipe says. You can make your own, make your recipe your own, and make it work for you and your family if you need to. A lot of times you can buy pork tenderloins they'll be on sale, and you can buy the really giant pork tenderloins at like Carly C's or Publix or Costco or Sam's. And then you're like, what am I gonna do with this massive pork tenderloin? Well, pork tenderloin is very, very lean, so it is a great option. And as long as your family enjoys pork, eats pork, then you could absolutely add it to whatever dish you are making as a substitution. So I'm gonna finish cutting this up. We'll see you guys back in just a second to throw it into our pan and get it all done.
Let's get out of here.
Protect what matters most in your life with security from Star Communications.
All right, welcome back, guys. So I do have my pork all chopped up, and I went ahead and added a little bit of olive oil to my pan, and then threw that in. Again, remember that pork tenderloin is a leaner cut of pork, so it is gonna be actually about the same in terms of your fat content as your chicken breast. So it is very, very lean. And if you can find that when it's on sale, that is a great one to, even if it's a large amount that you purchase, you can freeze portions of it. I would go ahead and cut up the portions that you need, you think you'll be using, and freeze whatever portion, whatever you won't need right away. But this is a great way to utilize that. So anytime you have a chicken dish, you can substitute that pork loin, and really any meat. So we're keeping in mind that recipes aren't rules, that we can absolutely take a dish, take a recipe, and adjust it to meet the needs of our family, our budget, what's on sale at the grocery store, what we have coupons for, because all of that definitely plays a role into what we're spending each week, each month, every 2 weeks, however frequently you shop at the store, but how much we are spending when we are grocery shopping. I will also mention, if you can find a place that has a local butcher, or maybe they get more of your local meats, that's a good way to find it a little bit more affordable. I was actually just talking to my mother-in-law about this the other day. She went to Carly C's. Carly C's around here is one that a lot of times they get their meats from our local growers. So they usually, I remember when we've had hurricanes, they've been the first ones to get meat back in their stores. So their meat does tend to be a little bit more affordable. I will say, if I'm trying to find leaner ground beef or ground meat in general, they don't tend to have a ton of lean ground beef or ground turkey or things like that. But as far as your cuts of meat, your pork, they'll have it pretty affordable, and it's definitely a great option. So this is looking good. We're letting it cook up we'll let it just get cooked on all sides for 1 more minute. We've got our veggies here. The other thing that we are gonna be adding is some green beans. Now I'm just using frozen green beans here, but this is another one that tends to be definitely available and very affordable during the summertime. So we're just doing a cup of that, a cup of frozen. Take advantage during the summer if you are growing your own. I know my mom used to grow green beans, and we would have so many. You could go ahead and freeze those. Now the process for that would be blanching it for a few minutes. Depends on the vegetable you're doing, but typically blanching will help to preserve it properly in the freezer. So you could go that route as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and add, I know this isn't quite done, we're gonna let it definitely cook down for a minute, so that is okay if all of our meat is not quite where we need it to be. I'm just gonna push it to the side, kind of separate it. Trying to get my little pieces that aren't quite cooked yet. This is a nice big pan, so that is a benefit of this. So now I'm just gonna add our veggies in. They look so pretty. And I am gonna crank up my pan just a little bit. Now pork only has to cook to 145, so it doesn't have to cook quite as high of a temperature as your chicken, which is gonna be at 165. So just keeping that in mind. If it is a little pink, it's okay. But the best way to know is to check your temperature to know if it's ready. So we're gonna let that all cook nicely. And the other thing I wanted to mention was just for you simply making your own seasonings. We just made our own sauce. Other sauces you could make would be maybe your own spaghetti sauce. You could buy the canned tomato sauce and then add a little bit of sugar to that to kind of offset some of that acidity, and add your spices to the canned tomato sauce. So it would literally be a can that just says tomato sauce, no salt added. There's literally nothing in it. It's not a pre-made sauce like your Ragu or Prego or some of those name brand sauces that we think of. This would literally just be a can, a typical can. You could do that, so you make your own pasta sauce that way. You can also make your own spices, and I will definitely link some of these recipes that we have. We have our own taco seasoning. This is a great one. I keep it in my pantry all the time because we make tacos pretty frequently, and I don't just buy the packs of taco seasoning, I just make my own. And this, you just use about a tablespoon, but you get a good bit when you make the whole recipe, and it just sits in your pantry for a while. We also have a spicy seasoning and a savory seasoning. So if your family likes either of those, this is just a seasoning mix, a blend of a couple different things. So it's another way for you to make your own instead of having to spend like $3 or so buying the pre-made blends. It's using things you might already have in your pantry. So what we're gonna do next, I'll put these to the side. Those are some sauces you can make. There are definitely more sauce recipes on our Med Instead of Meds website. So I'm gonna blend all of this together. And next we're gonna go ahead and add our pesto sauce. So this recipe, as I said, you could put it over rice, you could put it over pasta, whatever works best for your family. And you can add a little bit of extra pesto if you need it based on whatever your taste buds are wanting. If you wanted a little bit of extra, especially if you're putting it over pasta, you may use that as your sauce instead. So it kind of gives it that pretty green color. I'm just blending it. And you just want to cook this until your vegetables are tender. So that will probably take a few more minutes. We'll let it do its thing, and we'll show you guys what it looks like as it's a finished product. Once it's all done, the last thing you'll do is add a little bit of Parmesan cheese to it as well. Just tie all the flavors together. So this is a great way for you to absolutely cut some cost, utilize what you've got on hand, and hopefully save a little money, support your local farmers as we get into our summertime, spring and summertime. So I hope you enjoy this. We'll see you guys back next time on At the Table.